Do more is a call to action for all Australians to be allies, making the commitment to become more informed, more educated, and more engaged in creating positive change to challenge racism. This conversation series seeks to make change through storytelling. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community, and what we learn through storytelling culture of the longest continuous civilization on the planet. We pay our respect to elders, past and present.
I'm Linda Marigliano, and I'm chatting about DoMore with Miranda Tapsell today. Hello, Miranda.
Hi, Linda. Thanks for having me.
How has racism presented itself throughout your life, Miranda?
I'm a proud Larrakia Tiwi woman. I was born and bred in Darwin on my great-grandmother's ancestral lands. My mum was the AIEW, the Aboriginal Islander education worker, and she had instilled in me at a very young age how important education was. She told me that she finished school at grade 11, so she never got to graduate, and neither did my grandparents. I was very aware of that gap in education, and which was why my mum was so strict about me getting homework done on time and getting good grades. And the reason why she was so passionate about it in her work was because we saw lots of children who really didn't have that support at school, and she was there to support them, to get them over the line. I saw how poverty informed that. I even though I didn't live in poverty, I certainly grew up seeing a lot of poverty. I can see how systemically that affected my community. In terms of the racism that I personally experienced, I feel as if not enough people wanted to know how I saw things. And that's in terms of history, that's in terms of the way things are now. I'm speaking very broadly. There's an incident I talk a lot about in the media, and it's about the time I was called a half-caste by a boy in my class, and I was told by my family as a young person that you don't use that word. It's a very derogatory term, and the fact that my great-grandmother was taken from her family to become a domestic servant was something that still was very much it was very much in the back of our minds, because it was still something that was that affected our family. My family still had to keep the house clean. They still had to, because it was monitored all the time. They lived in government housing, and my mum, my mum had to go into the workforce early because her family didn't earn enough money. Half-caste was a word that was used to give people reason to take children away. And I know that if I was born in 1977 rather than 1987, that would have very much been my reality. And I just remember feeling very confronted by this term. And when I told the boy I didn't like that, being called that, and that I was Aboriginal, he's like, well, why do you acknowledge your mum's side of the family, but you don't acknowledge your dad's? Because my dad isn't Aboriginal. And that was new to me as well, because I've never grappled with, I've never had to grapple with what my identity was. I've never had to go, who am I? Like, what does it mean to have an Aboriginal mum and a non-Aboriginal dad? It was just normal. And I grew up in the territory with my mum's side of the family, who wanted me to embrace my Aboriginality. And I think my dad's family very much understood that, because I went through the world as a little Aboriginal girl. So that was something that they fully supported. So when this boy sort of was trying to come to terms with that, it was really hard for me to explain because it was just something that was, I was put on the spot for.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm put on the spot a lot when it comes to race. And I've had to learn how to measure what I say. I've had to, particularly with the profile I have now, I very much treat my profile like I'm a politician. I make sure that I cross all my T's and dot my I's. I talk to other people in my community to say, like, hey, is this the right thing to say? Because not many Aboriginal people get the opportunity to speak in mainstream media like I do. So I really take that opportunity with both hands and run with it. You know, but going back to that, that time when that boy called me a half caste, the bullying got so bad that my teacher had to pull the handful of students together, the ones that I was arguing with. And she said, you guys need to sort this out. Like, say sorry and leave it at that. And look, they stopped, but really their hearts and minds sort of didn't change until much later until we reconnected much later in life. It was such a big part of it. It informed so much of my life going into adulthood. And so, you know, I realized that I had to consider the way other people would react, but I think what messed with my mental health was the fact that not a lot of thought or consideration was being taken into what I was feeling and what I was trying to say. One of the reasons why I joined this campaign was so that I didn't have to explain what my identity is. I don't have to explain why my community has a life expectancy 10 years behind the majority. I don't have to explain why the education system lets down so many Indigenous kids. It's time for people to go and look that up themselves. There's so many books that they can read. There's so many people that they can speak to.
Yeah, there's not really a reason in 2020 to not be aware or be able to learn and educate yourself in anything that you want to learn about.
Absolutely. One of the big reasons why I wanted to become an actor was because I realized that the stories I could be a part of and the stories I could make could actually shift that conversation. It doesn't change anything, but it actually might get people to think more about how their actions affect others. And hopefully they turn their words into action.
I want to talk about that a little bit more, because there's obviously something that you've spoken about for so many years as a child growing up, throughout being in the entertainment industry. I'd love you to explain the important role that you believe that the arts industry and diversity within an arts industry really plays in terms of how society views itself.
I feel as if the arts plays a really great role in moving conversations forward. I come from a community where everyone plays their part. So I see the value in our academics, in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander academics. The special thing about our stories is that you're able to walk in our shoes for a little while and understand how we live and how we see things. One of the things I really like about being an artist is that I get to show how multifaceted my community is. That we come in all different shapes and sizes, and that we all have different perspectives because we've all lived different lives.
How do you sit in terms of feeling supported or kind of pigeonholed in terms of the way that you've been represented or pushed or pulled into roles?
I think one of the pitfalls that has happened in my industry is that we're not at a point where an image of an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person could mean anything. It's so stigmatized. Trying to subvert stereotypes that are so often portrayed in the media, that, you know, Aboriginal families are negligent, Aboriginal people drink a lot, Aboriginal people are violent, and they're aggressive and they're angry. I think one of the key things about art is being able to really shift that and actually show Aboriginal people how they are. The Aboriginal families I know are very loving and caring, so I want to reflect that in the work that I do. What's important to me is that I shift the conversation that is so stagnant. It's actually about portraying Aboriginal people in a more nuanced light. I'm so thankful that there have been countless amounts of filmmakers before me. Tracy Moffat, Rachel Perkins, Leah Purcell, people that have attempted to really shift that. When Aboriginal people are portrayed in a negative light in the media, then it becomes gospel for a lot of people. I always pride myself on trying to do the right thing by my community. I want to make sure that absolutely everyone's happy with how I've written or acted. It's just so important to me that that there's an honest portrayal of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, because if I don't get it right, then it just becomes truth.
Yeah, and you're someone that not only kind of lives within the industry and is someone that's on screen, but you're someone that generates their own concepts and their own content, and like your new book that you just put out. And how important is it for you to aim your content not just at broader Australians, but also at younger Australians and at kids?
My mum did such a wonderful job at getting me dark-skinned dolls that looked like her and me. She found books about the dreaming. She found dreaming stories that had been written down. So she found books that really celebrated Aboriginality. She even gave me a dress with the Aboriginal, like she made me a skirt with the Aboriginal colours. She made my Aboriginality accessible and normal. When I realised how important it was to kind of see that because I loved books and I loved movies so much, that when I actually got to see myself in them, I really liked who I was, and I was able to put my energy into other things like my friends and the work that I did. I wasn't kind of trapped. What the arts does really well is really show how the system that has been built in Australia has let down many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And you can do that in many ways too. I think there's many ways to kind of point out those issues. There isn't just one story to tell. So that's why it's so important for me that there's just a backlog of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stories, because everyone gets to see not only how differently we live, but just how systemic racism affects people in different ways, because there isn't just one way that people are affected by racism.
With the way that things have been unfolding this year particularly, and a lot more conversations happening, do you think that there is real galvanising change that's happening in terms of representing diversity in Australian media?
If I can be incredibly honest, I feel as if there's still so far to go with representation. I don't think it's just enough to have an image of yourself or someone like you reflected back at you. I feel like there needs to be bigger picture change happen as a result of seeing that person. So it's really only the kicking off point. for conversations to start. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people need to be reflected honestly and authentically, which means Aboriginal people need to be in front of and behind the camera. Because if they're controlling the conversation about them, then people have a better grasp of where the conversation needs to go after they've seen the film, the play, read the book, whatever piece of art they've invested in. The kind of art I want to be a part of is the kind that makes people think, and it kind of makes people's thoughts turn into action. What do people actively do to help Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders? It's lovely if people find common ground with the characters I play or write. They need to take that empathy that's helped them find that common ground and actually donate to Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander organisations. If an Aboriginal person has shared a link, then retweet that. But also, like, do that off your own back too. Don't wait for that Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander person on Twitter to do that. It's now, if you find an article that interests you, then share it. If you've donated to an organisation and you've found the link and it's easy to share, then share it. It's not enough for just Aboriginal people to share that kind of information. It's time for everyone to do that.
Miranda, we'll let you go, but thanks so much for your time today, talking about an issue that is very, very big. Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you so much, Linda.
Find ways you can do more at domoreproject.com.au.